Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to call to order this committee of the whole budget meeting for Tuesday, February 22nd. And in honor of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Any opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from committee of the whole number 223 from Tuesday, February 1st, moved by Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we go right into the main event, which is the budget session number 2. We'll bring some staff in. Morning, Thomas.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Thanks very much for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. We're ready to go when you're all set up.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to start out today essentially where we left off last time and draw everyone's attention to our supplementary appendix, which we've prepared. So I think if you want to follow along today, that's found starting on page 8 of the committee of the whole minutes today. Just want to make sure everyone's got that up there. I figured it's easiest to follow along so that we're talking the same thing.
Are you going to share your screen at, or
perhaps yeah, I was just going to share the same package to make it easiest.
If you want to just do the presentation, I can upload it and scroll along. That is easier for it.
okay,
That'd be great.
thank you.
I can remember how. Oh, right here. Been using Teams so much.
Yeah, okay. I can help you if you need that.
Okay. I think I got it. Can everyone see this?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks. I'm just trying to call up my screen because I've got the same document open a few times now. Excellent. Yeah, I think the purpose of today is to present to the committee of the whole the second draft budget. And I think just to really kind of emphasize the process and highlight where we are today and where we're going. I think the first view that we had of any of the budget was last session on February 1st. Today we've got some updates and some information, some answers to some of the questions. And really what we're looking to do today is ask for Mayor and Council's direction on essentially what percentage of an increase in taxes you're comfortable with. We have today presented again a budget with 0 increases, which again is a process of the budget cycle. We're going through many iterations before the ultimate deadline of May 15th and before that. We would like to have the tax implications reflected at the March 8th session. So that's the time in which we'll look and review another iteration of this budget. And really that's that feedback and essentially direction from council is what we're looking for today. What we have presented in this document and what we'll go over today is an updated view of the 2022 draft budget details, the budget account detail requests appendix as well. So we've provided some background on some of the specific accounts and the detail behind some of the admin contractors, consultants, maintenance, development contractors, and consultants. Again, as we had last time, this budget is shown with a $29,000 non-market change. And we have a lot of the same housekeeping. I'll perhaps not go over all of the line items in the discussion and comments as we've discussed those previously. However, probably the largest change, and I might just highlight my screen that I'm seeing up here. It was showing a desktop. I don't know if that was intended. But I guess further down.
Hang with me for just one moment.
Sure. I guess the one point too that I'd highlight while we're waiting for this to come up is we have also reflected the updated BC CPI figures of 3.9%, so down from 4.8%, and that's been updated throughout our budget. And little background on that, instead of going through each line item that is impacted, we were very conservative and aggressive in really trying to keep costs and budgeted figures as tight as possible. And we are seeing the anticipated pressure and impact of some of the inflation which we're seeing in the market, and already existing invoicing and contractors and services feeling that pressure. So to tie it back to my initial comments about asking for a view or some feedback around the direction of percentage of tax increases that mayor and council are comfortable with, we already are feeling that that there are some pressures in areas such as maintenance that we need to be very considerate of to be able to accurately and reasonably deliver forecasts with an accurate budget for this upcoming year. The other point that I would just highlight as a little bit of housekeeping, this is a snapshot in time that we're looking at here with the budget. We have made some changes to the reserve allocations that previously weren't carried forward. We're not going to see precisely the same budget reflected at each of these sessions, as we are still in that year-end process. So appreciate everyone's understanding that we are looking for input along the way and are able to continue to move forward with that feedback and reflected in the following iterations of the budget. Okay. We've also updated the salaries to reflect the staffing changes. We did reflect the updated timing in the Public Works Department at the request of Mayor and Council from last session, and have we see that now in the budget. We have also, as per last time as discussion, we reflected the salaries for Mayor and Council to reflect the current CPI increase of 3.9%. Later on today, we will have a discussion about the Mayor and Council remuneration, and we have updated capital projects and key priorities. We did lay that out to hopefully be a little more clear in each of the budgets. You'll see below operating expenses, we've outlined key priorities and capital priorities. So the idea there was we tried to make it a little more visible per department and per area with a breakdown of each of those line items. So hopefully that is a little easier for any questions or discussion as well. And I believe we did also mention this last time, but water and sewer capital projects, they're fully funded by user fees and don't have additional tax implications. But staff is recommending, we're recommending to increase the sewer rates by an additional $40,000. So we'll look for some feedback on that. And we're recommending that water rates remain flat for 2022 until we've conducted a water rates review. Also, I believe CAO Gilmore would like to touch on a bit of an update on the Friendship Trail. So when we get to that, to an appropriate time, we'll have a little bit of discussion around that today. Okay. So after this snapshot in time with some updates to our year-end processes, as well as adjusting some of our reserve allocations, we are reflecting a $482,302 unaudited surplus for 2021, which you'll see reflected in the budget. Again, this is a snapshot in time, and we have not completed year-end, nor have we gone through our audited financial statements through the full process that's involved in that. And we did, again, include the non-market change of $29,307. We still have not received any feedback from the public through our budget email, and continue to look through that, and we will be hosting an open session as outlined in the schedule.
Can I just make one comment? It should be noted also that it's unclear whether the non-market change will continue at that amount, only because we're at the completed roll. With BC Assessment, property owners have an ability to appeal or make any changes to their assessments, and we usually get the revised roll come end of sort of in April, early April, and that will be finalized when we bring forward the 5-year financial plan.
Thank you. Okay, I guess before we get into some of the details, I may just stop and see if there's any questions.
I can't see everybody, so I see Councillor Craddock's hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I don't know if this is the place to ask it or when you go through your numbers, Mr. Sikora, but I put in a request regarding what the savings were in the 0.9% on the CPI against total wages that we pay CPI to. And on page 12, how that would reflect against a tax increase. The last draft, it showed 4.07. So I'm just wondering what that reduction in CPI does to that number.
Yeah, I think was able to look at a couple of implications, as I mentioned at the onset. Not all of our, so there's two impacts. One is around our operating expenses excluding salaries and wages, and one is including salaries and wages. Excluding wages, the impact was relatively low. It was just over $3,600. The key reason why we didn't see the entire operating expenses increase at that rate was largely because we were quite aggressive in our line items, and we're reflecting individual changes. So not everything was driven by those assumptions of the 4.8 versus the 3.9. So there was a immaterial or relatively immaterial impact from that change. From a salaries standpoint, we did see approximately a $26,000 impact from that. So definitely impactful, and we are, however, still seeing pressure, of course, from what inflation looks like more broadly. We, not that we in process have used any figure other than BC, which was the crux of the discussion last time, but in reading broader Canadian trends and the impact in British Columbia, we are continuing to see pressure with increased inflation as well. So just want to be mindful of that, because we do anticipate pressures across our operations as a result of suppliers and partners. Essentially everything will see some impact of inflation, we expect, and just want to be conscious of that.
So again, if you don't mind, how does that reflect on the 4.07 we showed last time? It sounds to me like if 1% gets us about $19,000 or roughly in that area,
Mhm.
that looks like about a 1.5% drop. Is that the case? Will that make that big a difference to the budget, or where do you think we'll be?
But I mean, I think it's too early to really pinpoint an expected increase at this point. You're correct that it's just over $19,000 for a percentage increase at this point in time. I would say that as we do have a number of offsets, like or pressures, like we really will look to come in with a budget which is going to reduce the areas that we can. So I think it's probably too early in the process to highlight exactly, but I mean, we do see an impact from that adjustment in the assumptions.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor, if I may just follow up with one more question. I think the other question I asked is, we're going to be looking at Miss Gilmore to do some consulting. Is that budgeted over the next 6 months, or is that going to come out of CEO wages after Miss Fraser and Gwendolyn get paid that extra money?
Well, I might highlight that, we've really, per the direction of Mayor and Council from the last session, and I believe there was an in-camera session as well. We've really tried to, we have reflected the offset in reduction in salaries and wages, and also shown some of the contractor and consulting admin as found in the appendix. I can go into some of the detail when we get to that page, or we could discuss it now. I would say that only a portion of the contractor and consultant for strategic priorities, which has a broader, there's a detailed background of what's included in those costs that I believe were discussed by Mayor and Council as well. But part of it is reflected in that line item, and part of it is reflected across the various positions in salaries and wages as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that information.
Any other questions? Looks like we're good. Go ahead, Mr. Sikora.
Okay, thank you. Next up here, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Let me know which page you'd like to be on and I can move that.
Yeah, I guess before I go through all the details, I did want to maybe just seek any feedback if there's anything, if everyone wanted to go over material changes, go through the requests, go through each of the pages again. I know that there's a pretty long list here, but did want to see if there was any preference for how we approach today.
Did the committee want Mr. Sikora to take us through the highlights, or do you want to go just by questions?
Highlights for me would be fine.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So I would say on page 12, coming up here, where we've balanced each of the individual budgets in the surplus carry forward line there. At the end of 2021, we are, as I mentioned earlier, showing at this point in time a surplus carry forward of $482,000. Again, we've highlighted some potential scenarios here for your consideration on the impact of tax increases. 1% tax increase would amount to a $19,599 or $19,599 results in a 1% tax increase at this point. So do you see we have some questions?
If I might, Mayor Richmond?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks again, Mr. Sikora. I'm just looking at the surplus carried forward of $482,000 that we're going to use to balance the budget this year. I guess the question I would have, we use that money this year, and obviously that becomes our flat line for next year. Where do we come up with that money going into next year? That's a huge tax increase. I mean, if we needed that money this year to balance the budget, we'd be looking at somewhere around a 20% tax increase. And I just always wonder going forward, where do we look for it next year?
Yeah, I do see that Sayo Gilmore's hand went up and has some of the history too, which will highlight some of probably, please.
Yeah, so that we typically have a surplus carry forward every year. Last year, just going to scroll up, we had $757,000 that we surplus carry forward. And you will note that in some of the conversations we had last year, especially during tax rates, was that we are nearing a point where that line of where our accumulated surplus is decreasing quite quickly and our operating expenses are still going up. We are going to bring some more visuals and tables for council and the committee to see at our next meeting. But that's why we will most likely be looking at, and at the end of this conversation, asking council to maybe increase some of our, for this year, increasing some of our operational expenses in light of a larger cost of living increase, because we really do need to start not coming in at a flat budget, and making sure that we're accounting for this decrease in that surplus carry forward, because we are going to be in trouble in the next few years. I think we talked about it last year, and having to look at potentially, you know, 8-10+% tax increases if we don't start doing smaller increases to carry that forward, whether it's in an operational surplus or it's in specific line items that we're able to have some carry forward. So it definitely will make up a big chunk of our conversation at, well, some of it at the end of today, but also at our next our March 8th meeting, we will be having some scenarios for council.
Thank you. And that's my concern when I put the numbers down on paper and saw the graph that you're talking about. We're using all our surplus and yet our costs are going the opposite way. So yeah, I'm really concerned about that. So that'll be a good conversation. Thanks very much, Ms. Gilmore.
To be clear, there's also a lot of that, a chunk of that carryover is projects that were, am I correct, Ms. Gilmore?
Definitely some of them are carryover. A lot of them, and I just want to make a note, obviously some of the projects that we haven't completed are funded through other sources other than taxation, but the ones that are funded through taxation, we don't tax for twice. That's what that part of that operational surplus carry forward is. So I don't have at the top of my head, but there are a few that were driven from tax increases and are carried over, or there where we didn't exactly meet where we intended for budget. Another line that you would see is due to some of our turnover, our salaries weren't exactly where we expected them to be. The other thing carry forward, you'll also note in development services that they did blow our budget out of the water for what we had expected as a conservative estimate for building permits and development permit application fees. So that also calculates into that surplus carry forward. And I would say for this year and maybe even last year, a big chunk of that accumulated surplus was from the additional application fees from development services. I would say it's becoming less and less from our expenses and more from revenues earned. So that's even more of a concern in the fact that we do need to think about increasing taxes to cover our operating instead of relying on the accumulated surplus carry forward.
Any other questions? Okay, carry on.
Okay, thank you. I think we can probably jump into the administrative and financial services budget here. So I would highlight that we did have some discussion last time, a few questions about the contractors and consultants line. I'm just I did want to address that as well as maintenance. both in the admin budget. You can find them, I'm just looking because it is tiny on my screen here. We've got 2 pages, actually 29, as well as 30, which detail that. So maybe if we start on page 29. Wonderful, thank you. So the background behind the 2022 budget, which we do show as a reduction from last year's budget, is in the amount of $41,400. It's made up of $5,000 for fire alarms. There's a small provision of $1,400 for stand-up desks, ergonomic desks. There's been a continued line item which has not been completed for updating the aging floors. The largest share of this is the cleaning and maintenance contract work here, as well as $4,000 for garbage removal. So that would be the breakdown for the maintenance expense in the admin budget.
I could just add a comment. This might be one of those, again, having been basically remote working for the past couple of years, I don't think that we've truly seen an actual reflection in our expenses in a number of sort of maintenance line items such as this one. And we have reduced it from the last time the committee has seen this budget. So this might be one line item we may want to reconsider increasing slightly, given that we will most likely be returning as much as we can back to the office now that the restrictions on capacity have been lifted. We're just working on a plan to return now. I just wanted to flag that with council or with the committee.
Thank you. On the next page, want to highlight the background on the contractors and consultants. So we've included the provision for the municipal hall design for $25,000. The Leaders International recruitment fees are noted for $48,000. And then we've included a consulting line for the strategic priorities consulting. So as Councillor Craddock inquired about as well, part of the fees are including the consultation discussed, and this is broader than that alone. However, as there are external consulting expenses that will be allocated to some of the other strategic priorities as well. And of course, the benefit to looking at consulting or contract services, of course, is that, you know, on an as needed basis or as opposed to necessarily adding permanent staff, we're able to achieve longer term cost savings through this approach. Okay.
Any questions on that? Ed?
Thank you. Next up, and I guess to highlight and just share with everyone what we did change in terms of presentation with this iteration of the budget. We have included key priorities, as you see below operating expenses I alluded to earlier. So really tried to list out some of those individual line items to help better reflect or indicate where we've seen spend of a material nature and where we have budgeted for some of the larger line items. And in the comments section, as you'll have seen, we also have reflected some of the funding sources so that you can see the offsets up top in revenues. As there aren't any material changes here other than what we discussed, I did want to probably keep moving. no material changes here, but we will be discussing the mayor and council remuneration later on today for discussion. Along to development services. So again, as CAO Gilmore has alluded to, definitely with a very resilient year in 2021 in terms of the revenues coming in, I would say that that does present some uncertainty going forward. It's this revenue is not necessarily a reliable or stable source of revenue. So just want to be very conscious of that, especially as we discuss our contributed surplus. We have tried to remain a little bit, well, we tried to put an accurate set of assessments forward here for the estimated budget. This is a snapshot in time. We have reflected estimates which are slightly lower than last year's actuals, but I do highlight that this is above last year's budget. So we've done our best to work with the development services team to reflect these funds. I would also highlight the contractors and consultants in the worksheet. So the breakdown that we have seen, which does support an increase over 2021, includes $20,000 for planning consultants, $20,000 for engineering consultants, $15,000 for the DCC bylaw, Sea to Sky invasive expensive $1,650. There's the OCP support of $30,000, the subdivision and development control bylaw for $15,000 in the 2022 budget, Lot 8 master plan for $8,000, Pemberton Creek design budgeted for $25,000, and other expenses budgeted for $10,000.
If I might, Mr. Sikora, can I just ask, all these items look really good. I appreciate the way it's been set out. Why do we put Sea to Sky invasive plants in here with the this department? It seems a strange place to put it.
It's always been there since the very first time we funded it.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
it doesn't doesn't actually have an increase in budget. We just have to put it in someone's budget, and so it's often found in here.
Okay, I've always wondered that way. It kind of sits there. It seems a funny place to have it, but thank you.
Actually, I think that department first brought this forward and was part of the first committee for it. And so just because it's always been there, we haven't moved it at all.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. I think that was probably the largest of any of the items on development services. Moving on. In terms of fire, again, we're still not complete with the discussions in funding with the SLRD, as this is requires approval and sign off, and there's a process that is still ongoing. So I would note that subject to change. However, I believe that since we've last had this discussion, we have met once and are reflecting a budget which has changed slightly. There have been a number of changes, but again, scrutiny across all expenses and continued pressure from an increasing call outs and services and support, along with some of the regulatory regulatory requirements. I think the other note here is we have seen a slight increase in the actuals for this last year since we did meet last as a result of some of our year-end processes and the timing of invoices. Excellent. Next up, we've got Public Works. I guess I would say we're continuing to see pressure. I guess one of the bigger concerns here is we're continuing to see pressure across maintenance and some of our aging equipment. As you'll see in 2022, we've reflected at this point a slight in the maintenance line item for works, a slight decrease compared with actuals. However, we are experiencing continued pressure there. Though the budget was at 45,000 for this past year, you know, a number of factors have contributed to that. But I would perhaps, as we discussed earlier, bring that for discussion on some of our anticipated pressure. The Western Star borrowing as well is reflected with a 5-year implication here as well. So we've put an assumption that that would be beginning in July of 2022 and reflected that in our interest and equipment principal lines here. So half a year for this year, and the duration of that 4.5 years reflected in future years. Again, we've also broken out the capital priorities to probably better reflect this per budget than the project sheet. Hopeful that this would be a little more clear. I think we did discuss this in great length last time. However, I believe CAO Gilmore wanted to speak to the Pemberton Farm Road East project and some of the changes, savings.
Thank you. Yes, if we can scroll, so I'm just going to scroll quickly. I don't have the page number here.
It's page number 32.
So at our last discussion, or even discussion of the budget around this project, as previously identified, we have not been successful with any additional grant funding for this project. What you're seeing on the screen right now was the budget we had prepared and applied for those grant applications, of which I think we've done a total of 4 grant applications on this. So one of the things that was suggested, could we look at scaling the budget back a little bit, and what would that look like, and would we be able to fund it? What we had last time was a contribution of $92,000 from the SLRD, and then split the rest between gas tax and COVID restart funds, and what that could look like. So in review, these 2, the light posts and the pedestrian crosswalk flashers, those are additional items that we had put on that could be removed and wouldn't necessarily impact the safety of the trail. Obviously, it would enhance the trail, but no other portions of the Friendship Trail actually have lighting. And it is something that we could go back in later and look for grant funding for. So that's the reason that you'll see that the electrical and conduit and wiring are still left in here, because we're going to be paving that section. So we want to make sure that we're not having to go back in and dig anything up if we wanted to include these enhancements moving forward. So if you look on page 33, I've prepared a budget basically with all the same factors, a 20% contingency, some engineering design, there's permitting. There's a section of the North Arm Dry Channel that we need to get some environmental permitting and some sort of reinforcement to be able to put the trail across. So we've been able to reduce it to 414,000, which would mean, we would do approximately $161,000 from gas tax and then $161,000 from COVID restart funds if council or the committee was agreeable, and still allocate the $92,000 from the regional district. So that's for the committee's discussion. The other thing that I wanted to draw to your attention is that there is another grant opportunity if we wanted to wait to see how, if we were successful on this. This is a federal funding for active transportation. We had applied for provincial funding for active transportation grant, which we were just unsuccessful on. So we are partnering. This is a very large pool, and obviously it's throughout Canada, so it'd be highly competitive. We are working with the regional district on this one. They're looking to apply for sort of a larger planning grant for the Friendship Trail to identify where additional elements need to be added, whether it's potentially, again, I haven't seen the details, widening or paving or what other sections need to be completed, and that will be packaged. And they've agreed that this could also be packaged if the village was agreeable. A couple of things that would obviously delay this project. I'm not sure, I'm assuming summertime-ish is when they would announce that funding. If council or the committee would like to see us apply for that funding with the regional district, we could also backstop it in our budget, as it doesn't have any tax implications. So there's a couple of things we could do. Right now, we are having it held in a variety of different funding opportunities. It's just up to the committee if you would like us to wait on this project for another year or so, or if we wanted to proceed with it sooner rather than later.
And so, Ms. Gilmore, I know it's always difficult to say, but it's anticipated that this funding opportunity will, what's the timeline on it?
I believe I was advised sort of summertime-ish,
That
maybe
the-
late.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think as some other funding we've received through the federal government, and no slight on any of their processes, but it is taking a long time to get through the funding announcement period. So who knows what will happen by that time.
Fair enough. Any questions? Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm looking at the one that you're showing right now with the total amount being 414,000. I think, just my own personal thought, I would love to see the asphalt and the line painting taken out, because that'll be the only part of the trail that's asphalted. And instead of those numbers, which is about 49,000, I'd like to see the pedestrian crosswalk put back in. I think budgeted at 35. So I'm more in favor of a safety factor than I am asphalting basically what would be about a half a kilometer of trail.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts on this? Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
Mayor Richmond. Just curious, further along the lines of Councillor Craddock's comment, but please refresh my memory. I thought that section of the trail was going to be asphalted because we were going to do the Farm Road East at the same time, and we were trying to get it all done at once. Is that correct, or am I thinking of another project?
No, that is the correct area. That is what we were wanting to do. Obviously, well, just so you are aware, Permanent Farm Road East needs to be brought down sort of to the sub base and then rebuilt back up. But it's just a matter of obviously all the compaction and materials that we need for the base of the road. We would, I mean, obviously it's a slightly different standard for a trail, but we don't need to asphalt it if that is something the committee wants to consider. That is something we could go back and it'd be a little more difficult later, given we are having a bit of a swale or drainage ditch in between and some landscaping. So that's the intention. We have the road, a little bit of a separation, and then a 3-meter wide trail. And just so council is aware, we will be having the portion of trail along the Dendorf Park. It will be asphalted. It'll be 3-meter wide asphalt. And then the portion of the bridge that we did, although it's not asphalt, it is the recycled asphalt that we use to compress the trail to have a little bit more of a sturdy structure on that portion as well. So I do agree that the majority of it has not been asphalted. However, that has not been the area within the village of permanent boundaries.
Yeah, follow up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, looking at, when I drive down that road, there's always lots of signs saying, please slow down, shoulder crossing, whatnot. I would have a tendency, I would agree with Council Craddock that having light posts and crosswalk flashers would be quite helpful for that area. Considering that it does seem to be a high use area with people going back and forth with whether they're mountain biking. I think those safety features should remain in your budget. Thank you.
Ms.
Can
Gilmore,
I just make a comment for clarity? Councillor Craddock, you were just referencing the crosswalk flashers, correct? Because that's about equivalent. Is that? Just
That's
that
correct.
was-
I wasn't talking about the lighting, just the crosswalk flashers. Thank you.
I see Councillor Antonelli, just a quick question. If we were to go with the grant application, I'm assuming we would go for all features, yes? Go ahead, Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I'm in favor of waiting to see if we can get the pool of money from the federal government. I don't mind, waiting for that. I do think it's a fine idea not to pave the trail, and just in terms of sustainability, I think lighting a pedestrian trail out there it uses energy, and we're looking at decreasing our energy use. So I'm not really in support of lighting the trail, but I do think the crosswalk flashers, if we want to put that back in the budget, I think that would be okay.
Councillor Noble, did you have anything?
Yes, I agree that the safety feature, the flashers should be retained if possible, and asphalt's not as important. We manage without it quite well in the rest of the trail.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I'm happy to support keeping the flashers in. I think keeping the conduits for lighting is a good thing for safety down the road when that becomes even busier, and kids going back and forth to soccer in the evening, that sort of thing. So I think putting the conduits in is a good idea, but we can obviously wait on the lighting if we don't get the grant. I'm happy to apply for the grant. I think we would allow for upgrades all along the trail, but I would also like to backstop it. I'd like us to, considering that we can get the project done without going to taxation, using COVID restart and gas tax money, I'm happy to wait for and support the grant application, but I'd like to backstop it with that funding opportunity to make sure it gets done. In regards to the asphalt, I hear the comment. I mean, most of it is gravel. My only thought is if we ever did want asphalted, it's a lot cheaper to do it now than if we ever wanted to go back. But other than that, I'm willing to be convinced either way. So yeah, those are my thoughts. So are there any other comments? There's no other comments. We could make a motion to recommend to council that we support the grant application in its entirety for the Friendship Trail upgrades with the Federal Active Transportation Grant. So how about we do a motion to that effect to start?
I'll move that.
Seconder? Councillor Antonelli, further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And would someone like to make a motion that in the event the application is not successful, the project is funded through gas tax and COVID restart funds?
Move that.
Village's portion. This is a recommendation to council. That's moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any further?
If before you call the vote, Mayor, if I might add, does that include removing the asphalt and line painting and putting back in the crosswalk and conduit?
Yes.
Okay, then that's great. Thank you very much.
Everybody good on that? Okay, I will call the question then. Any opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Gilmore, do you need anything else from us at this point on that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Sikora.
Excellent, thank you. I guess that was probably the largest item for discussion or change in the Public Works and Parks budget. Unless there's any questions, we'll keep moving on. So probably best to go next up to page 22. Again, the transit budget is one in which we receive guidance and have reflected the budget provided. No changes to this expense. Next up on page 24, we have water. We discussed this in detail at our last session with no major changes for discussion. Next up, sewer. Same as with water. We didn't make any material changes that were not discussed since our last session on expenses.
One thing we might want to ask here is right now our annual allocation for reserves is $160,000 annually. So since 2018, we started putting $40,000 into our sewer reserve, and every year after we've added another $40,000. So at this point it's at, and it's similar to what we did with water. We did that over a 6-year timeframe where we added an additional amount each year to have a lesser impact on the users until we reached $320,000. And that's what our water rate study at the time advised us to do. And we've consistently done that. And we haven't undertaken a sewer rate study, which is still on the books. However, we were really falling behind in sewer and we didn't have any allocation. So we have been putting that away each year. And so what we would like to ask the committee is if they're agreeable to adding another $40,000 this year, which would take our annual allocation to $200,000 for sewer and keep the trend.
Questions on that? Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, not a question, but I certainly support that. I think when we started this, putting the money aside, that was what we're reflecting, trying to get up to a point that we had a substantial amount of money in reserves. We're already looking at the future and how we're going to keep things going as our population increases. So I certainly would support that for sure.
Anyone else? Okay. Leave that in there.
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Antonelli.
What does that mean for the taxpayer?
It actually has no impact on the taxpayer whatsoever, but it has to do with our user rates. And so there's annual user rates, and there's also a volumetric rate for those who are on metered quarterly billing, which would be our outside boundaries, Pemberton North Water, and our industrial park. Industrial park's a little different because we do purchase water from Lowatt, and those are tied to one another. So what we would ultimately do is we would see, we would add an increase in our $40,000 split between the revenues that are shown above here. It's a relatively insignificant amount, but we will be bringing those forward for the tax rates, because it's important to understand that implication when we discuss overall increases as a whole to village residents and taxpayers.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on.
Thank you. May I just ask a question, and perhaps Gilmore might be able to direct the process, but in terms of reflecting that increase for our next session, are we comfortable to do that, or do we need any sort of process to reflect that?
We need a motion for that? Can't hear you.
Yeah, I thought I clicked it, but I obviously pushed the wrong way. We could make that as a note that we'll carry it forward. I don't think we need an official resolution for that. We have a few others that we'll be dealing with as well.
Thank you. Unless there's any other sewer questions, I believe we've covered off all of the specific questions that we had been presented at our last session. Sorry, I guess airport as well. No material changes to the expenses are reflected in the airport budget. Councillor Craddock, though, I believe has a question.
Yeah, I've been looking at this airport, and we've talked about over a number of years, and quite a few years ago, we looked at making a change with the airport. And considering the amount of time and effort staff put in on this and the recovery we get out of there, it's just something I know I'd like us maybe to consider at another committee of the whole meeting. Is this maybe the right time to start looking at turning this over to an airport society? And I know that's a big question, but I'm looking at the letters we get, the comments we get about the snow clearing and the leases and all that type of thing. And when we look at the amount of money that it brings in is marginal, and I'm wondering if a society could work within that budget and look after things themselves and take a lot of pressure off staff. And so I'm just wondering if someplace in the future we could have that as a discussion, please.
Okay. All right, well, how about we put a motion to bring forward airport operations for discussion at a future committee of the whole meeting? Put it on the button.
I'd like to do that, Mayor Richmond, and certainly I don't expect it to be done until after we get the budget completed, that's for sure.
Okay, so down the road, a motion to have that brought back to committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Skora.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry, that was the last of page 28 was the last of our individual departmental budgets for discussion for today. And as I mentioned, we've discussed each of the individual budget worksheets that addressed each of the specific questions. So I guess at this point, the couple of discussions and decision points, and please, C.O. Gilmore, help me out if my process isn't correct, but ultimately would like to discuss now with Mayor and Council what percentage of increases Mayor and Council would be comfortable with to present at our next session. As we highlighted earlier, the budget process for March 8th is again another iteration or discussion of the budget, but in reflecting some of the changes and pressures, we would be able to present what a budget may look like at that point with the tax implications reflected. And please, C.L. Gilmore.
No, I was just thinking, just sort of going back to this piece, I just want to share again, because I think it's a good visual. So if the committee is agreeable, what we've done in the past is we've brought forward some various multiples of what tax implications look like based on the current budget and the current scenario that we're at. And so I think in the past we've done 2, 4, and 6, something along those lines. So if council could give us some direction, because every obviously worksheet that we need has a little bit of a different calculation that we want to make sure we're running. And so is there a comfort level between, would it be agreeable for a certain percentage of operational increase and a certain percentage, say, I'm just going to throw some numbers out, a 2% operational increase and a 4% reserve allocation? Are there other scenarios you'd like to look at, or do you just want to look at straight across the board what a certain percentages of tax increases look like to bring back for the March 8th meeting?
Okay, thank you. Before we get right into that, can you just tell us what other reserves are baked into this budget?
We will actually bring forward those numbers as well. As Mr. Sikora has mentioned, we're still going through year end and we haven't actually closed the books yet, meaning we're even processing invoices that are still back into 2021. We expect to close that by the end of February, and that's typical in our timeline. And then we need to do all of our allocations. So some of what you've seen here, we've done our best to put placeholders in. For example, the say economic development strategy or the climate action plan that had an offset of a reserve. So we need to go in and make sure we're doing those entries and we have those reserves allocated to based on what last year's ending was, what we put in for this year and what we've expensed. So we need to do a little bit more work before we're able to bring that back. And that would be part of the discussion that we bring back on March 8th.
I think that's important. Obviously it's important, but it makes it a little bit harder for us. And I know this is a starting point, but to give that comfort range, just because I think it's really important we understand what reserves are there and what we're already adding within this budget. So I look forward to seeing that.
How does that have an impact on the tax percentage?
It doesn't have it, but in terms of, when we're looking at a tax percentage increase here, for instance, whether it's a 2 and a 4, as you suggested, 4% going to reserve, we're in a position now, although we're looking at carryover surplus, we're concerned about growing operating costs, and we want to build reserves. We do have a budget that's lean and that's presented with a 0% increase at this point. So we're able to, with the tax increase we do look at, we'll be able to split between growing operating costs and reserves at this point. So I'm just curious how that balances towards other reserves that are already in there. But it doesn't change our calculations by any means.
No, and sorry, when I was speaking about reserves, I was talking about more than just the capital reserves. I was thinking about other things such as the gas tax, the COVID restart, which we aren't contributing to on an annual basis. So obviously we want you all to have that information as well. So you'll know that we're not, when we have some allocations in the 2022 budget, that those haven't been expensed. But I can tell you right now what we have as far as, let me just go back here because it's shown on this budget, just for your information right now, without the $40,000. So we're showing $347,000 in general reserves that we're allocating each year, just so you're aware. Yeah. And then we have $320,000 in water, which is shown under the water budget, and the $160,000 that we just saw in sewer that we could increase to $200,000. So those are what, and again, that's just a quick high level bit of numbers for you right here. We will bring back some additional details for you to really see what those annual allocations are and where we're at as an ending balance.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay, questions? Thoughts? Or do we want to start the tax implication conversation? Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, I guess for me, as much as none of us want to increase taxes with a 3.9% cost of living increase, I would be pretty much hard pressed to not go with a 4% in my mind, just to recover that so that we're running equal. The budget obviously shows that we're bringing forward quite a surplus from last year, but at this point we don't know exactly how close those numbers are. It always seems at the end of the year invoices show up that all of a sudden impacts that big time. So if there's 50 or 70 or $100,000 come in or something's under budgeted, 4% is barely going to put us on track. So like you, Mayor Richmond, it's a hard number to pull out right at the present time, but I hate to say it, but I certainly can't see us going anything less than 4%.
Thank you. And then bearing in mind that last year we, due to circumstances, kept the budget at 0 to try to lighten the burden as much as we could on taxpayers in light of the pandemic. So yeah, we have a little catch up to do, I would say. Go ahead.
We did a 0.8% increase last year, and the year before was a 0.08% last year and a 0% the year prior. So I just wanted to, like, there's been a couple years.
I hate to do this. I see you next, Councillor Antonelli. I've got 4% battery. I just have to grab my charger. I'm going to call a 2-minute recess. My apologies. You're next.
If I might ask while the mayor is hooking up again, for the next meeting, would we have a COVID recovery kind of budget come back to us? I know that's not in our taxation budget, but it'd be nice to just see where we are with that and what
Yes,
we're
and
looking for.
we'd like to bring all the statutory and non-statutory, so say the DCCs, so you can see where we're at, gas tax, COVID restart, as well as our general reserve allocations. That's the information we would like to bring forward on March 8th.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Antonelli, thanks for that, everyone. Councillor Antonelli, go ahead.
Okay, I think that it's fair that the tax increase reflects inflation to some extent. So yeah, I am supportive of a small increase. I'm wondering though, if we're going to have this discussion about that intersection we talked about our expenses going up and our carry forward funding going down. If we're going to talk about that in depth, and if we'll have another opportunity to review that staffing discussion that we had previously.
Yeah, certainly. I think that detail will be provided. I think as I was preparing for today and becoming familiar with the process as well, I think my predecessor always did a great job of presenting that with a little bit of history. So that's the intent, is to have that provided as well for discussion. I think, and I mean, too, I think it's prudent to look at our planning going forward to ensure that we're thoughtful about reserves and balances and looking for the future, especially with the pressure that we've seen over the past few years without the increases. So catching up essentially. So that's the intent, to have that discussion. I think for in terms of the salaries discussion, I guess I would want to know what specifically you're looking for, whether it's another discussion on rates or whether we're using CPI increases, or what specifically would go into that. And I would caveat too, we have two uncertainties that I believe were noted in the comments. We do have uncertainty with union negotiations, as well as what we receive for a transit budget, which are both ongoing and may present additional pressure.
Right. Well, I just thought seeing that graph you were talking about would be really helpful for our discussion around increasing the number of staff. That was more what I was referring to.
Just so everyone knows, the staffing that we had previously approved has been incorporated into this current budget. So there you will see no changes moving forward to the salaries in this particular year.
Councillor Antonelli, you good?
Yep.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll give my thoughts then. I feel that, like I said, we did a 0.8% increase for obvious reasons last year. We recognize that growing town and growing operating expenses, with that graph we're referring to, we need to keep up. So we don't want to get to a position where we're having to do 8, 10, 12% increases. So 4% is the very minimum I'd like us to consider. I'd like us to consider a 6.6%, even a 7% increase. I'd like to see what that looks like anyway. I don't necessarily want us to consider that right now, but I'd like to see what that looks like when it comes back on the average household in business. So yeah, I would like to see 4 through 7% increase, and that increase would allow us to build that operating budget as we see costs increase and not hit our taxpayers all at once. And it would allow us to continue building reserves in the meantime while while we do have that carryover surplus, we can continue to build reserves with that tax increase as well. So I feel good about the fact that, and that's why I asked the question earlier, I feel good about the fact that we're building reserves baked into the budget in some cases, but I'd like to see us build on that even more. And this is an opportunity to do that. So like Councillor Caddick said, none of us like to see us having to increase taxes, but I would like to see what it looks like for discussion up to 7% increase.
Certainly, we'll have that for the next session.
Anything else? Councillor Noble, Councillor Zant, would you like to chime in? Good. Okay. Councillor Noble.
I agree with what you say. Like, we need to keep up so we don't slam people later on.
And again, we're obviously not making that decision. We're asking staff to come back with what that looks like on the average household so we can have a better conversation about it with some more information that council is requesting.
Yes.
Is there anything else council would like to see when this comes back, or the committee, sorry? Okay. Do we need a motion for any of that, Ms. Fraser? Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And we'll move along. Is that it for the budget session, Mr. Skora?
That is.
Okay, now we'll move right into, does anybody need a quick break? Everybody good? Okay, we'll move right into council remuneration then.
Thank you.
Okay, so before the committee this morning is a bit of a review of sort of how the current makeup for remuneration for mayor and council has sort of trended over time and what the current bylaw reads. We also took a variety of samples that you'll see on appendix, let's see, on page 39. So it begins there. We've actually identified a couple of different groupings. So the first one is in the Sea to Sky corridor. Obviously, sorry, in the regional district, it includes Lillooet as well. Obviously, we have a variety of differences in between our organizations and just communities, whether it's budget or staffing, et cetera, et cetera. But it is good to always reference what's happening in the Sea to Sky because it does influence some of what's happening in Pemberton. The other scenario that was brought forward is on the SLRD. Now, regional districts typically have a different remuneration schedule. There is an amount for sort of each meeting that they're attending, depending on what committees they might sit on. So that has been identified on page 39 of the report as well. And this is actually a range from 2016 all the way to 2021. A couple of notes, you will see that there are some, we've had to pull from both the SOFI reports, which is Statement of Financial Information. That's not typically done until the end of June of any particular year. So we won't see 2022 information on here. Additional information was brought from Civic Info, but you'll see that some of them have unreported values. That's just because the organization did not submit their information and it obviously is not available. So on page 40, you'll see that we have pulled a variety of comparisons that are of like population. I would say that even though we may have like population, we obviously are all dealing with different situations. For example, if you look at Anwar, the top of the list on this this chart, this table, they have no commercial. They just strictly deal with residential. So right away, we have a significant amount of commercial and industrial farm. We don't have a lot and residential. So we all have different influences as well, whether or not we have contributions. Don't see any on it. So Chase, for example, it has other industry that is providing dollars instead of taxation that we don't necessarily see. So all of this is before council for your information and your discussion, and we will and whether or not there were any changes you'd like to consider. The one thing I did want to note that's in the report is that there were some changes a few years ago, which identified that typically council used to get about 33% of their remuneration was sort of for ancillary expenses that were part of the role as council, and that changed. So what the village did is we did increase that so that compensation or the remuneration for council didn't decrease, and it maintained at the level that we had had in the past. Also, the bylaw does specify that on an annual basis, mayor and council remuneration will go up by cost of living. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have, but we're obviously happy to hear the direction the committee would like to proceed with.
So as the bylaw is written, Ms. Gilmore, remuneration goes up only by CPI.
Correct.
Okay, I'll open it up for questions. Or comments. All right, Councilor Craddock.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. I just wanted to have a look at it. It's been since 2010 since we've changed the remuneration, except for the CPI. And I thought it was time to take a look and see how we were in respect to other communities of our size. Obviously, it's never easy to compare because some have got larger industrial, some have got less, and some have got larger budgets for other reasons. So it's really tough. But the other thing I wanted to see also is back in the day when we set councillors pay at 50% of the mayors. And I guess when you look at the right-hand column, it appears that that's almost pretty standard along the way. So I think we're at the right spot. So I would leave it open for other people's suggestions or conversation and to see where we might want to go. It's an election year, so there's increasing at this time make it easier for people to make a decision to run because they have the ability to hire caretakers for the children when they're attending meetings and pay for expenses going back and forth. So that's the reason I wanted to bring it forward, and I thank staff for putting this together.
Thank you. No comments. Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
Yeah, my comments are close to Councillor Craddock's. I might plagiarize here a little bit too. I went through all the different remuneration for the different municipalities, and it seems like we're on par with 50% of the mayor's salary. So I think I look at our salary and I feel that it's aligns with the other communities as well. So I'm happy with the CPI increases every year. So thanks to staff for bringing this forward. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, looking at the list, the communities that we seem to have, something in common with. So Tofino and Invermere and Bowen Island, it seems like, our compensation is very similar to theirs. So I don't know that I would really recommend any change.
Thank you. So Noel, did you want to chime in before I do?
I'm fine with no significant change personally. It's not really a job we do for money.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I mean, it's something I've had this conversation for many years now, and I think it's a tough one because nobody wants to give themselves a raise. It's a funny process to go through, and you have to provide yourself with a raise. Obviously, CPI to me is a minimum. We're fairly similar to other communities. I think population tells one story, level of activity tells another. But I think the main thing is, back to Councillor Craddock's comment, my concern is, election years moving forward, we do look at the cost of living around here, which is a big factor, and people are busy trying to pay their mortgages and trying to live around here. And so if we, or raise families, so if we want to attract good candidates, it's a similar story to what we look at with staff. With the changing market, with changing expenses and cost of living, if we want to attract good candidates, they've got to be able to afford to run. No, we don't do it for money. Thank God I never divide back by the hour what we make, but that's not what it's about. But it should cover some chunk of time so people have the ability to perform their duties. So it worries me. I had a feeling the conversation would go this way. I'm okay leaving it a cost of living increase. It does really worry me. I know the time I put in, and this isn't about me. Whoever's sitting here next, it's a lot of time, and to be able to afford to do that, if you're taking the time away from your family and or your work, you either have other financial abilities or you're at a stage of life where you can afford to do that, which rules out a lot of population here. So I think it's a problem. I'll leave my comments at that. Go ahead, Councillor Noble.
I do share those concerns for sure. I'm just not sure that a bit of extra money is going to really make the difference or not, but I do recall the last election, there was barely enough of us to have a proper election.
Mhm.
So definitely that is a concern.
Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, Mayor Richmond, with those comments, and I believe that we don't want to get so far behind that maybe in the next 4-year cycle, they're going to look at a 10% increase. I would suggest for the next 4 years, we look at a 2% increase per year. And the next council can decide going forward from there where we're at. And that we reestablish that the councils will get a total of 50% of what the mayor makes.
Can we do either quick math and tell us what kind of tax implication that is, or bring that back next time, one of the two? Which would you prefer, Nikki?
Let's bring it back if we could do that, please.
And for clarification with what we're bringing back, is that 2% in addition to CPI? Okay,
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, is the committee comfortable with that, to have a look at, see what that tax implication is on a 2% increase on top of CPI at our next meeting? Okay. That direction's been given. Anything else on the remuneration conversation? Okay, seeing none, I don't think we need any motions. So I'll just go back to my agenda. Thank you, Mr. Sikora, for your work today, and thank you to everybody. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Noble. And we're adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a good day. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you very much, everyone.